right?
Mm.
So I say this to my patients and athletes all the time. Like marathon training is not a way for you to lose weight. Like that should not be the goal of your marathon training. Like it is the worst way to go about weight loss. Like it's success, it will be successful. You'll burn a ton of calories and you'll drop weight, but it also comes at an incredibly high price of you're now putting yourself in too much of a caloric deficit where you quite literally don't have the raw materials in your body to go to replenishing the bones.
Mm.
And and this happens a ton. We see this all the time where this is actually a nutrition issue more than a training issue. And then we also know that athletes who get less than 6 hours of sleep at night are at an increased risk of developing these injuries as well. And
Yeah.
so really, really, really like for all of my athletes and part of the care that I do with all of them, especially in these, is like, look, this is not just about getting this bone back to a healthy state, but we also have to fix the habits that got you here in the first place. And typically, most experienced runners, they know how to train, right? It's actually oftentimes not that too much too soon in the training. Novice runners, that can be the case. Experienced runners, more times than not, this is a recovery issue or a nutrition issue.
Wow, this is great. There's a lot of different places I could bring this. So I want to bring it back to, you mentioned how this can be a common stress fractures or pain can be a common thing when you maybe used to run, and like you used to maybe run 15, 20 miles a week, but then you take some time off and you think, because I used to run 15, 20 miles a week, I'm going to get right back to that. And that's what makes sense for me. But then you start to experience pain. Is there like a particular period of time that like science shows, or that your anecdotal experience shows, that like how much time it takes for your bones to not be as strong as they once were? Like, if I took just 1 month off of running, can I go right back to the mileage that I was at? Or is it like, if I took 3 or more months off from running, do I need to come back down to starting at 10 miles per week and then ramp up from there? Like how quickly do we know, or maybe we don't know, with how quickly bone breaks down?
Yeah, that's such a great question. The reality is it's totally person dependent, and there's a large factor in this too. Is what has your lifelong training history looked like?
Mm.
Like if you've been training and you've been running since middle school, right? And like you took a month off or whatever, you're probably going to be okay. Your tissues are so well adapted at that point. They're so used to going through training that they probably are going to be okay. Like remember like our body has in some ways like a memory, right? And so the more that we do something, the better it is to do something. Like I'm sure you've been through periods, as I have too, with strength training and with like hypertrophy training, for example, where it's like, man, I haven't really been hitting it in the gym quite as hard. And honestly, like my legs are getting a little smaller, my arms are getting a little bit smaller. Like I don't have quite that physique that I used to. And then you go back to it and it kind of comes back like pretty quickly, all things considered, right? You're like, oh man, like that didn't take so long to come back as long as I thought it would. And this isn't too different from that either, right? If
Mm.
you have that habit and you have that practice, like the take home message here is not to be like, oh God, if I want to start running again, like I got to start at 5 miles a week and then, build myself up. And this is going to take a million years. But also at the same time, like if you've only ever run like a half marathon and then you take 3 months off and now all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to go right into a full marathon and I'm going to like, you see what I'm saying? Like that's really where like the things get a little bit riskier, right? But I think too, like the take home message also is to not be like fearful of doing these things, but to just like be logical in the approach to it. But also to remember that with anything, we have to always weigh out like what risks are you willing to tolerate versus
Right.
what are you hoping to achieve and where do we strike that balance? And different people fall on that spectrum differently, right? And so the reality is like if you want to perform at a really high level, you have to get as close to that threshold of training that is right on the line of doing too much. You have to walk that line the whole time if you
Yeah.
want to be at the top level. That is a very different goal than saying, hey, I just want to like exercise and not hurt myself. Right. Like the
Yeah, for
rules,
sure.
the rules there are completely different.
So if I'm somebody who is like, I want to focus on running right now, let's say, and I want to start logging my miles, but I know that strength training is important. So I need to be doing strength training exercises, and I'm not hurt right now, but I want to prevent any kind of stress fracture or any kind of pain moving forward. What are maybe like, if I go in for a strength training session and I want to dedicate this strength training session to injury prevention for my running, if you will, what are types of exercises that are most important?
For sure. No, that's such a great question.